So this is the Ayaneo Slide, Ayaneo's very first slidable keyboard where you can like flip up the display and have a full keyboard that you can type on. And I thought this was a really cool device because they made it so tiny. Like this is one of the more portable gaming handhelds that you can buy on the market today. And it's a little pricey, you know, like if you're picking this up, you're looking at $899 for the retail pricing, which is $200 cheaper if you buy it on their Kickstarter, but it's not a cheap guy, you know, like if you compare this to something like the ROG Ally or the Lenovo Legion Go, those cost significantly less, which gives you pretty much a very equal experience. Now, the one thing that I do love about this is obviously the portability. Like this is a very small device. To give you guys some context, this is the ROG Ally directly below it. Then of course, if you want to see what it looks like against the Legion Go, you can see that it's obviously a lot tinier. Now, the only place that it's not smaller is the thickness. This is actually thicker than the ROG Ally, and it's actually thicker than the Legion Go, which is really weird because you'd think just by looks that this would be the thinner device, but no, it's not. There's obviously a lot of space in here for the cooling, and we'll talk about that shortly. Plus, you have to include the slidable display at the top. But you have to ask yourself, do you want or actually need a physical keyboard on your gaming handheld? And it really depends on the type of user you are. Like for one, the one thing that I like about having a physical keyboard is the fact that I don't have to use the virtual keyboard on the display. And usually when you pop a virtual keyboard, what happens is it takes up half the display, and it's really hard to see what you're looking at, especially when you're talking about a display that's only 6 inches. With the physical keyboard, you always have full access of the display. Now, I don't think this is the best built product by Ayaneo. Like it feels good when it's in your hand, but there are some questionable QC issues I do foresee happening in the future. Like for one, this screen is very wobbly. You know, like even just looking at the back over here, it's a very, very wobbly screen. The good news though is that you can tilt this screen up to 30 degrees. So if you want it to be a little bit closer to you when you're holding it in your hand, you can obviously do that, but it does shake quite a bit. Of course, there's different levels you can choose, anywhere from 10 all the way up to 30. The keyboard experience itself, like it's not bad to type on. It's very flat. Like it's hard to put, you know, a clicky keyboard on such a small form factor, but the keys do feel very flat. Like you're not going to be typing on this super fast at any moment, but you know, it does the job. It lets you get around. What it really reminds me of is the old like Verizon Sidekick smartphone. The keyboard is very squishy. Like it's a super squishy keyboard, especially when you press on it, you can just see the entire middle going down, so it's a bit soft. But besides the keyboard, what's around it is built very well. So for example, at the top, you have a bunch of custom buttons on the left and right hand side that you can bind using the Ayaneo Space software. You have Hall sensing triggers at the top, which feel absolutely fantastic. You have your volume control. Your power button also acts as a fingerprint scanner to log you in quickly. The top Type-C port is USB 4. You have a nice big exhaust. And of course, you have your right Hall sensing triggers on the right-hand side. On the bottom of the device, all you have is another Type-C port, which is also USB 4. You have your 2 speakers that are bottom firing. They sound pretty good. Like I do find the speakers on the ROG Ally to be better, but these are more comparable to the Lenovo Legion Go. And of course, you have a slot for the micro SD card. So these are Hall effect controllers. The RGB can be changed underneath the actual joysticks, which is really cool. Of course, the keyboard also has RGB, so you can change the colors on that as well. Ayaneo's little D-pad over here feels so good. It's nice and clicky, it's soft, I love it. And then same with the little buttons at the top right. You also have a dedicated button that takes you to Ayaneo software where you can go in there and then change different settings. For example, I have it on 25 watts. You can obviously boost this up to 28 watts. To be quite honest with you, I didn't see that big of a difference between 25 and 28. This thing just runs very well at 25 watts, so I just left it there. Now, the star of the show is this IPS display because it's a gorgeous IPS display. Like the color accuracy is fantastic. The color gamut is good. The screen brightness is, you know, right up there. It's not the best I've seen on a handheld like this, but it's still really good. If you're gaming on this, you're going to appreciate the display. You also have fantastic viewing angles. Now, the big question is 6 inches too small to game on? Well, for me personally, I find 6 inches too small. I'm older, you know, I'm like 102, so like having a bigger display is obviously preferable to me. But if you're mostly playing like side scrollers, you're not playing any FPS games, then you can totally get away with 6 inches. You do have pretty thick bezels around it, but overall it's a very good display. I should also mention there are little deformities on the device. Again, these are not a big deal. Like this is probably an early unit, but like you can see over here where the plastic is, this is not like 100% flush. And same with on the other side, there's like a little gap over here, like it's not all the way in. I haven't opened this up yet, so this is how it came directly out of the box, but you know, these are like minor details. I still think this feels better in the hand than something like this, even though technically this is lighter. But the specs on this guy are really good. Like we're using a AMD Ryzen 7 7840U CPU, which is very similar to the Zen 1 Extremes you'd find on the more commercial devices. And of course, it's rocking that RX 7800M. This one comes with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. And of course, you have that 2 terabyte NVMe SSD, which by the way, you can upgrade to an M2280, so the full size NVMe SSDs. So if you really want to put something bigger in here, you totally have that option. The cooling solution on this is actually really good. This is one of the more quiet handhelds I've used recently, significantly quieter than the Lenovo Legion Go, a little bit quieter than the ASUS ROG Ally, which I find very impressive considering that this is a smaller form factor. Now the performance on this is actually really good. Like it was able to beat out the Lenovo Legion Go in most of the tests that I was performing. Now granted, the Go is running at a slightly higher resolution, so technically FPS in certain games are going to be a bit lower, but you know, it's quite a bit lower in some of these games, even though that machine can run at 30 watts, where this one kind of tops out at 28. The ASUS ROG Ally was right in line with this. Like it's just a very good, solid performer. Even when I was doing like my average core clock speeds test, this guy performed very well. And it just produced the least amount of heat compared to the other two devices. Now you can obviously reduce the TDP all the way down to 10 watts, but you will take a hit in performance. Quite frankly, I always game at 25 watts because I want the best FPS as possible, and I recommend you do the same thing too. And I feel like even at 25 watts with pretty good fan noise, the battery life is like nothing special. You know, most of these gaming handhelds just don't have good battery life. Like if you're rocking full 25 watts, you're probably getting about an hour of battery life, right? If you drop it down to something smaller, like 18 watts, for example, then you can like, you know, push the battery life to maybe an hour and a half. And then if you go all the way down to 10 watts, you can get a lot closer to 2 hours. It just really depends on how demanding the game is. Here's the thing, like gaming on this feels good, you know, like it's smooth. I didn't have any dropped frames. Like the performance was just very consistent. I really enjoyed playing side scrollers on this. I loaded up Diablo 4 and I was just playing along with that, and everything was looking great on it. I didn't have any slowdowns or glitches. It just runs very well. But the big question comes back to, do you need a keyboard or not? You know, and I think for most people buying this, the keyboard is kind of only handy if you're like typing an in-game chat, because you're not going to bring up a virtual keyboard when you're typing to somebody in in-game chat. It's just not going to work. You just can't do it. So here's the thing about this guy. I like the way it feels in my hand. I love the performance on this. I think Ayaneo did a fantastic job. The software experience is pretty good, much better than before. The only thing that concerns me are the little things, like the screen being super duper wobbly. You have the squishy keyboard deck, and you know, little things like, you know, the back panel not being 100% flush with the entire device. Then there's always the big question on how will Ayaneo handle issues if they arise. Like this is not ASUS, like this is not Lenovo, where you can basically just walk into a Best Buy and hand it in, or ship it to Lenovo or ASUS, which obviously have bigger departments to handle this kind of stuff. Like if this goes wrong, you got to ship it all the way back to China, and you probably have to wait for a very long time. But if you don't mind losing out on waiting to get your device back, I think they've done a good job, you know? Like the performance is just so consistent, but the price point is definitely higher than some of the more available commercial options that are currently available. Anyways, you guys let me know, are you excited to have a keyboard on your gaming console? I also must say, opening and closing this does sound very, very satisfying. Either way, let me know in the comment section, like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.